Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. We actually have a solo geek show tonight. Patrick Minton is traveling and Arturo Galletti is busy with work-related stuff. So I'm just going to try and do a solo man show. I have a script in front of me, so if you notice me facing right, it's me cheating and cribbing off my notes. I am in my nerd cave. I've tried to set things up a little nicer, so hopefully you enjoy it. Anyway, I am Andres Alvarez, also Nerd Numbers on the Twitter. Our producer is Brian Foster, who is Boxscore Brian on Twitter. We call him the Word of God on this show. And as always, we'll have him introduce himself. He may be hopping in more this show because it's just me. So say hey, Brian.
Well, my influence in general, even on this show, probably isn't similar to a deity, but I'll take any compliments I can get, Trey.
Well, you work in mysterious ways on, magical computer sheets where you send me messages about time and tell me what to do. So maybe.
Oh, it is very mystical. In a show about science, I like to keep, the curtain not drawn back. It needs to stay there, just like Oz.
So hopefully we're not being too blasphemous, but let's hop in. So I was surprised because you actually did some work to make the show possibly more dynamic. We wanted to do topics on the fly. For those of you that watch live at the bottom, there are the little topics we use to try and figure them out before the week. As if you have a drinking game for this show, that is one of my dogs scratching themselves on near the collar, which they always wait until the show starts to do. Near Christmas time, I guess it'll be more topical. But this week actually had a surprising number of topics just kind of pop up organically. And Patrick has actually written a decent amount on them. So the first one, Patrick wrote about this earlier, which was Plumlee versus Cousins on the Olympic roster spot. And I really like this piece because basically Patrick's point wasn't that confusing. He just said, hey, guess what? Plumlee was a much better choice than DeMarcus Cousins. If you run down the stats, Mason Plumlee last season was a star, and DeMarcus Cousins is a good player. Like I said, Arturo's been talking a lot about players under the age of 25 that can put up 24 points and 12 rebounds. The sad truth about DeMarcus Cousins is he's a chucker. He takes a lot of ill-advised shots. He's not terrible, but he's actually Kobe Bryant. He has the same shooting efficiency, or at least last year, as Kobe Bryant has for a career. And we've often said Kobe Bryant's a tad overrated when it comes to that. So DeMarcus Cousins, basically a chucker, an amazing rebounder, but Plumlee is a very efficient shooter and does a lot of stuff well when you talk efficiency. And what was interesting to me about this piece that Patrick discussed is Plumlee is doing what he's supposed to do. And I don't think we give enough credit to that. Basically, people are saying, well, Plumlee can't do this. Plumlee can't take all these shots like Cousins can. Plumlee doesn't have as many outside shots as, other players. And to me, that's always been kind of flawed reasoning because we don't give enough credit to players not doing things they don't excel at. Dave actually, I believe I forget which podcast he does so many, was discussing this. We don't give enough credit to players that don't do things they can't do or don't do things that aren't really all that beneficial to the team. One of the prime examples I'll actually give you is mid-range shooting. When you look at players that are efficient from mid-range, Chris Bosh is a notorious example that comes up, what you actually discover is that even if you're really, really good from mid-range, it's not even close to being to an average, shot from inside the paint or an average shot from the three-point line. So you're really, really good at this skill, but it doesn't really help your team that much. It doesn't help your team much more than, just getting one extra layup or one extra uncontested three. So Patrick talked about that, basically saying, look, even if we think Plumlee can't take all these shots, well, on this team, Plumlee doesn't need to take all these shots. Plumlee needs to, take efficient shots, help out his team. He actually doesn't assist that well, but DeMarcus Cousins' assist rate is really, really high, but his turnovers are ridiculously high. So he may not actually be a good passer. I'll actually need to look in depth. Basketball Reference has that. They have turnover by type. So I'll actually have to see if he's turning the ball over on bad passes or just, ball handling. But I love this idea of bigs that do what they're supposed to and being valuable and productive. And Plumlee was star level last year, and DeMarcus Cousins was a good but not great player. And another article that Brian, you forwarded along today, and yeah, feel free to hop in if you've got more thoughts on this, was by Zach Lowe. And he called it the NBA's bigs problem. And talks about Fareed and, talks, of course, Kevin Love. Kevin Love is a unique player that can shoot from outside, 3 point. I want to stress 3 point is where if you're going to be a floor stretcher, outside shooter, you really need to be a 3 point shot. I do not want my power forwards taking mid range shots for a variety of reasons. One of them, by the way, is that if you're taking mid range shots, you're further away from the hoop and you're decreasing your odds of getting a rebound, which, by the way, that's one of the things Bosch is really, really bad at. He has not been an effective rebounder as he's taken more mid range shots. Yeah, his shooting efficiency is good, but guess what? Many bigs that take shots close to the rim have very good efficiency and they get more rebounds. Rebounds are helpful. But so he's talking about this kind of trade off of, well, you want outside shooting and you kind of want bigs that stretch the floor. And he's giving examples like, you know, Boris Diaw can take threes and Chris Bosh. And, Kenneth Faried thinks he's a max player, but, he can't really shoot from outside. So is there value? And I just kind of find this notion ridiculous that we really, really focus on players being good at skills that may not actually be all that productive. And Brian, I think you were telling me you like this point I made in an internal forum, where basically I said we've got all these advanced stats that let us zoom in on very specific attributes of players, how well they defend shots really close to the rim, how well they shoot from certain spots on the floor, but we don't often get the magnitude of those actions. And that troubles me because we get articles like the one Zach Lowe writes, where he discusses these skills that Kenneth Faried doesn't have and acts like it's a problem, but it's said without context. And when we kind of examine Kenneth Faried holistically, like with something like Wins Produced, we see that on the whole, his actions are very productive to the team. And these skills that he's not good at may not matter as much. And then Patrick had a great response, which was, if you have a player that can't do everything, and most players can't, and if you're not LeBron James, you can't do everything. There's a funny part, which is LeBron James isn't really that great at offensive rebounding, but that's really because he just shoots too well. He doesn't miss enough to get enough rebounds to put back to be, if he missed one more shot a game and rebounded it, he'd be above average for offensive rebounds. But if you're not a player that can do everything, you kind of do the intelligent thing and build a team based on the skills you can get. And what you should really go after first is really, really productive players with rare skills. Hopefully Patrick is writing an article up. By the time this post is out, it may already be up. But I looked into 3-point shooters. Last season, if you look in the NBA at players who took at least 4 3-point shots a game and shot at least around 36%. I had actually started a little lower, but it turned out the threshold was about 36%. 42 players did that last season. If you looked for players that got over 10 rebounds a game, only 12 players did that. And so my kind of basic point is, if you're going to build a team and you're thinking to yourself, well, I really need a big that can stretch the floor. No, you don't. Just if you can find a really efficient big like Kenneth Faried, who is highly efficient from inside, who gets tons of rebounds, who, I hate the term hustle player, but that's what everybody calls him. Guess what? You can probably find a 3-point shooter that can help stretch the floor. But teams don't do that. What they kind of do is they narrow in on specific skills they want their players to have, and then they use that to denigrate players like Kenneth Faried. So that drives me crazy. That's why I really like Patrick's post on Plumlee over Cousins, where he's saying, look, Plumlee fits perfectly in that team. You don't need a player that's going to take a ton of shots. You don't need a player that's going to try and pass the ball a lot and turn the ball over a lot. You need a player like Plumlee. There's already going to be people like Chris Paul and LeBron James, etc.
Oh, I love those posts too. And yeah, the specific part from your reply that I really liked was the word magnitude. And that's really what matters here is, I hate to go back to Kevin Love. Oh, sorry, another Kevin Love reference on a show. We can't get away from doing that. But that's the problem I have with, what Lowe is talking about in this article is, everyone's looking at all these different big man skills. Oh, do we need someone that can shoot? What about the old stuff like rebound and rim protection? And that's why it's ridiculous, because you can measure those things, right? And it's maybe Kevin Love's bad at individual defense. Maybe he's not as good at some other things that you can measure, but he's just so good at rebounding that it's going to trump all that, right? So that's what people are missing, in my opinion.
Yeah, my classic example is basically Shaquille O'Neal and Dwight Howard. These are two players, even now, I think, Dwight Howard would have no problem getting the max on the open market. These were two players that in their prime were just considered completely dominant. I don't think Dwight was as good last season, but in his prime when he was winning Defensive Player of the Year every year and putting up over 20 points, everybody knew he was amazing. And the same of Shaq, back in his heyday in the Orlando Magic early days in Los Angeles. But they were terrible at free throws. And no one said, these guys are so bad at free throws, no one should sign them. You could zoom in on their free throws and tell me how bad they were, but they kind of accepted holistically their game was good. But then players like Kenneth Faried and Kevin Love, we zoom in really quick. We forget all the other parts of their game and explain that's why they couldn't work on your team. And that's preposterous. All right. So that was rant number one on team construction and this ludicrous nature of, wanting bigs that can stretch the floor and how hard it is to decide between a player like Chris Bosh or Kenneth Faried. No, it's not. On to the Pacers. So this was really rough. The Pacers lost Paul George. I would love to hear your thoughts, Brian. Hop in if you've got him. If not, I can just keep ranting. But Paul George is this player that is amazing. He's like Steve Nash in that he's just gotten better and better. He's one of these players that's, wrecked the box score geeks on our predictions about Indiana because he's had two huge jumps in 2 years in a row. I think before the show, I was talking about his points per 100 possession, and every year those have just gone up and up and up. And he scores more than 20 points a game, highly efficient, great player. And what's remarkable to me about Paul George in that sense is he kind of falls into this Adrian Dantley range where I just don't think he gets the respect that a scorer should get. We know that people love scorers on winning teams. Players like Carmelo Anthony and Allen Iverson got all of this credit, still do, right? Carmelo Anthony was such a big name in free agency. And, they basically, even after years of being on mediocre teams and, their teams being fine when they left, these players still get a bunch of credit. I think Iverson, up until Detroit, maybe Memphis, was still getting, heralded as he's going to make a difference. So it's remarkable to me when you have a scorer like Paul George that kind of just doesn't get the love you'd expect him to get given his efficiency in points per game. And there was this Nate Silver piece. And by the way, I'm probably about to go off on Nate Silver. I'm sorry, man. Your 538 basketball analysis is garbage. I'm just going to go out and say it. I was really, really excited when ESPN picked up 538. And even though I had been a little skeptical of some of Nate Silver's previous basketball posts, I was excited about the direction he would take it. The one action I'll give him, and I'm still behind and for the most part happy with, is the signing of Ben Morris. I do like Ben Morris. He was one of the big Rodman proponents.
Now, is Ian Levy writing on there as well? I know you're a fan of his.
Ian Levy, and so that's, by the way, one of the things. He was talking to them about it, and Ian Levy never got picked up by them. He did some freelance stuff for them. Ian is now over at Nylon Calculus, which is awesome. So that's kind of my point is I'll give you Ben Morris. Ben Morris, I like his stuff. We've had some issues with his work, but at least I like the direction and thought behind his work, even if I see the flaws in it. But the stuff Nate Silver's written, and it's no secret to anybody out there, by the way, I'm not a fan of Neil Payne's. It's just not good analysis. And so they wrote this piece up. This was by Nate Silver about how, hey, guess what? The Pacers lost Paul George and Lance Stevenson, but it's not a big deal. They're going to be fine. And the stat he ended up using was RPM. The original version was called RAPM. The version ESPN uses now is RPM. I've got a post on my problems with it. It's a black box metric. He basically said, hey, they're not that bad. Now, one thing I like about this is it's just like our stuff. He gave the estimated minutes per game, the estimated RPM per game, how much you think that's going to translate. We can look at this at the end of the season and verify how on or off he was. But, that's actually one sticking point I'll give it is Nate Silver seems to be just shotgunning statistics. He uses SPM by Neil Payne, which is not a metric you should ever use. It's not a good model. It's not well-founded. It's regressing on APM, which is a garbage stat. I'm sorry. It sounds mean. It comes across as mean. The background I'll give a lot of us at Wages of Wins is very academic. And the kind of point is if you're going to do research, if you're going to do analysis, it should be at least somewhat vetted. I'm letting you know that the methodology they're using is not vetted. It'd kind of be like if you were submitting to a biology paper and admitting you used homeopathy because, it seemed popular. Anyway, so they go over RPM and say, hey, the Pacers look in okay shape. They lost Paul George, they lost Lance Stevenson, but we still think they're like a 44-win team. And part of my complaint on this was the use of RPM. And just, the fact that, the assumptions behind this are that Roy Hibbert and David West are basically worth, 19 wins together. Uh, and, it's just not very good analysis. And, to me, it's also going back to this myth that Paul George just doesn't matter, which to me is very odd. And, it doesn't include other analysis like aging and all that stuff, but we'll leave that at the table. He also did a follow-up piece today, which you pointed me out, which, was interesting, and I haven't read over it as much, but the reason I kind of started shaking my head is this piece was about how players respond to injury. And the method he uses now is he uses a wins above replacement. Our thoughts on that based on SPM, which is Neil Payne's metric. Again, this to me just you kind of, I think, I don't know if you said this on this podcast or before the show, just seems like he's in over his head. I have no idea what he's doing. He's just kind of shotgunning around stats and seems no clear methodology. Why is he hopping back and forth between SPM and RPM? He's trying to tack on wins above replace, whatever. And his basic analysis is interesting. One thing I'll say about injuries, we were discussing this, is it's really, really hard to judge injuries, particularly because we don't get full information. Blake Griffin, for instance, just withdrew from the Olympics because of a fracture in his back. After that happens, he goes, public and says, hey, it's not even a hairline fracture. I'm just doing this precautionarily. I just need to rest. It's not going to affect me. No basketball player or professional athlete, or typically most professional athletes, have no incentive to give you in-depth injury analysis. That was one of the great parts about the Sam Bowie documentary, was that he admitted when he was doing his physicals for the Blazers, he had pain in his knee and he lied. They were like, does this hurt? And he said, no, it doesn't hurt. Because he knew perfectly well that his payday depended on it. If he didn't get, if they didn't sign him, that's millions of dollars at the door. So, and then teams are the same way, right? If you're going to want to trade a player, you're not going to come out, if you're the Blazers and want to trade Greg Oden, you're not going to come out and say he has no cartilage or whatever. So injuries are hard to gauge. There are other factors like age, et cetera. So I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening with Paul George. And my end kind of thought is the Pacers are in trouble because if you've looked at them the last couple of years, Stevenson and Paul George are huge, huge parts of that team, and they've now lost both. The comparison I made was it's as if the Heat lost LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. And based on Wade's kind of decline over the playoffs and his age, you might argue that they did. You might argue next season that the Pacers and the Heat will be off the top of the mountain that they've been at for the last couple of years. And my kind of just general poke at 538 is the analysis I've seen there on this is just shoddy, and it's depressing to me. And, Nate, if you're listening, what I'll tell you is if you want to prove to me that RPM or SPM is a good stat to use, show me some analysis on why it's the stat you're using. There was an XKCD comic that was really interesting, but it used player efficiency rating. And, nothing against Randall Monroe. I love his stuff. It's very clear that he doesn't really know basketball. He just went out there, went to ESPN. It's one of the first stats he saw. So I'm just going to use that stat. Went ahead and wrote the post. He didn't have any reason to do in depth. 538, you claim that you have an advanced sports section. It would behoove you to put a little background research into the stats you're using. It doesn't have to be wins produced. I'm just saying the ones you're using aren't vetted, and the analysis on it, and by the way, Neil Payne's analysis on it is not good analysis, just doesn't give me much faith in that. That kind of depresses me. My personal take is the loss of Paul George is really, really going to hit the Pacers. And if you're going to be one of those people that goes on the floor spacing analysis, yeah, they're in trouble. I mean, Evan Turner is going to take more shots. The Pacers are not going to be a good team without a surprise outbreak from another player. I wouldn't be surprised to see it because apparently there's something in the water in Indiana, but that's where they're at. That's kind of my rant there. We'll see if I get, insulting Sabre people. We'll see where that gets me.
No, I'm with you on the Pacers. They lost their two best players, and, I don't have it right in front of me, but I believe by far their two best players, so they could be in for a tough time. One thing I'll say is that I remember in the pre-show last week, someone was saying, I wonder if Arturo's previews will have them missing the playoffs. That'd be really interesting. Probably not in the East. They'll probably still be okay, but yeah, I agree on the magnitude there. On Silver, though, yeah, my comment on him was basically, he's proven himself to be a pretty good political analyst writing for New York Times. And, what we always say about him is that it's not like there were political scientists that were disagreeing with what he's saying and that he had some kind of political science revolution with his work. Really, it was the pundits, the mainstream media, and political parties who were, interested in discrediting him that tried to, right? So he was good at politics, but now he's got this whole sprawling blog with all these different topics, and he's trying to edit it all and also keep writing himself, manage all these different writers. That was my comment. It seems like he's in over his head because the other areas just aren't coming up as well as his political analysis.
There are a few, and who is the? Let me see if I can get the person in front of me. Mona Chalibi. Apologies if I said the name wrong. I've liked her stuff. It's been good work. Part of good statistical analysis to me, by the way, is not going complicated first. Sometimes interesting stats can just be basic stats in an easy to read chart, not necessarily making, causal claims, but just saying, just here's information on, minorities by state or something like that. That is interesting. That's good analysis to start. You don't have to make claims. But, like I said, we've got these charts on the most recent post that he's written using wins above replacement based on SPM, trying to graph different players and how they came back from injury. All of these players were different ages. The injuries are not the same. That's the rough part about injuries. They're the bane of my existence in NBA. Derrick Rose has, much like the Pacers, Derrick Rose has foiled us for years because we've had hope for him to come back. Not even full strength, right? We've just been like, if he can play 50 games at 75% of his level, the Bulls are in great shape, and Derrick Rose is out for the season. So, that kind of stuff. They're not easy. And so when you're trying to do these really complicated articles with stats that aren't vetted, I just kind of look and shake my head, where sometimes the best analysis, and this was one reason I was sad he didn't pick up Ian Levy full time, was that some of Ian's work, I've talked to Ian, he's one of the most humble people, and he'll say, I don't think my analysis is that complicated. And I go, but your analysis is great. You start very simple. You start with simple questions and then build on it. And I can follow what you're doing and see what the analysis is going at. Whereas trying to pick apart this recent piece, which, I know was rushed to be out in time to talk about the Paul George injury, I just, knowing how much, I'm going to steal kind of a Feynman point. I know the amount of work it takes to do analysis, and the level of analysis this post is going for, I just do not buy has gotten the vetting that it needs for me to take any conclusion away from it, given its complexity.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, much better than I did.
Well, like I said, I'm stealing. I'll link it in the comments, but yeah, there's a Richard Feynman point where he's talking about, it's actually nutritionists, and it's funny how that's still true today, where he says we have these people that are nutritionists that are telling you the right diet and the right way to eat, and that wasn't around at his time, but that antioxidants cure cancer and all this stuff. And he goes, look, I'm a physicist. I do work. I know how much work it takes to prove any of these things. I just don't buy that they've put in the work to do it. And that's all I'm saying here. I already know there are some flaws in the methodology to start. And then going beyond that, I know how complex the topic is.
You're talking about RPM specifically?
I'm talking, well, RPM, again, my post on this was, I don't know how it works. I will admit that. I will say that the analysis that it is based on, which is RAPM, is not good work. That's all my claim. And it's also very black box. Basically, both Alex Conkle and Dave Barry downloaded the data from the site and were doing analysis on it. And both of them noted that the values changed, and we don't know why they changed. So, you have this problem where, and the initial, and the statistical model it's based on, the ridge regression, basically it's not to improve the accuracy of individual players. It's to make the population match the output better, which to me already seems like an iffy methodology. But I'll admit, I don't know all of the variables that ESPN's variant puts into it, and I'm not alone here. Kevin Pelton, when he was asked about it when it first came out, was like, I don't know how it works. And so from that, I refuse to really go for stats that aren't transparent. There's a great post by Ari Caroline about this. And that's my point. If you hand me a stat that says player A is good, I say, well, why is he good? And you go, I don't know. I go, well, that doesn't do me any good, especially, if he's going to change team or change roles, whatever. So that's my problem with RAPM. SPM we've looked at, and like I said, it's a regression on adjusted plus minus, which we already know has flaws. Both of those we've looked at and gone, wow, these are both flawed models. And you already know my thoughts on wins above replacement. So it's kind of like I'm like you're making multiple missteps on the stat you're using for this article to begin with, and then you're tackling a really complicated subject. That's what I got.
Oh, that was a good rant. You have anything more on the Pacers, or are we ready for the last topic?
We got two topics to end with, right? We'll see if you can have the dynamic ones. We have tanking and Becky Hammon. But yeah, I got two rants in against, I'll say Nate Silver. Like I see some hope. There are lots of writers at 538, and I've seen some good analysis at 538. Nate Silver's analysis of basketball, and a majority, not all, like I said, I like Ben. Um, a majority of Nate's basketball decisions have left me scratching my head. It's kind of like watching Michael Jordan back in the Washington Wizards days. Anyway, the last topic we were going to discuss, this was from Patrick, was on tanking. And I was really hoping to get him on the show, and hopefully we'll get him next week because I want to talk about this. What is fascinating to me is he's talking about the Philadelphia 76ers. One of our Sloan stories is that we met Sam Hinkie. Actually, a funny precursor. I met Sam Hinkie and I didn't recognize him, so I introduced myself. Sam Hinkie is a laid-back guy. He was eating fries with Zarin from the Boston Celtics. And I said, hi, you look familiar. He's like, what's your name again? He was like, oh, I'm Sam. I said, nice to meet you. And I didn't recognize him as Sam Hinkie. Later, I was walking around with Patrick. Patrick goes, oh, that's Sam Hinkie. And I was like, oh, crap. I didn't recognize him as Sam Hinkie earlier. So anyway, and Patrick just emailed me. But so with Sam Hinkie, Patrick walks up to him and goes, I'm a big fan of what you're doing. And of course, obviously, this is at the point when I think the 76ers had won 15 games at that point. We were hoping for them to hit the over. So Patrick said, I'm a big fan of what you're doing. Could you just win two more games? And Hinkie was like the most baffled I think you'd ever seen someone, because, Patrick was treating him like Daryl Morey at Sloan. And he's like, I've been losing, right? But Patrick's point in this recent post is that the 76ers may be the first team that's tanking correctly. And I would argue the first team that's tanking correctly since the new rules. So Devin has written posts about tanking in the historical NBA back when it was coin flips, back when, basically if you were the worst team in your division, you had a shot at the number one pick. A legitimate, like a decent shot, because what it used to be is they would take the worst team in each division, they would flip coins against each other, and the winners of that would get like the first, second, third, etc. And that's why the Chicago Bulls, there was definitely tanking the year Hakeem Olajuwon, Sam Bowie, Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley were coming into the draft. Because it made sense to. You actually had, better, like a 25% chance of getting the number one pick. You didn't have to be the worst in the league. You just had to be the worst in your division. So that's what happened there. They changed the rules to bring in the draft lottery, which in theory should disincentivize tanking. But the 76ers are actually doing it right, where the classic model people believe is you tank, you get a high draft pick. That high draft pick is a star. You give them lots of money. They win lots of games for you. The right model for tanking is you don't needlessly spend money on players you don't have to. You only keep, basically rookie prospects or like star veterans on your team. So that's why, the 76ers let Evan Turner go. They said, you're about to get a raise. You're not worth the money. We're going to let you go. Same thing with Spencer Hawes. You're scoring points on the free market. You're going to be worth money. He's picked up, I think, by the Clippers. We're going to let you go. They're going to draft players. They're not going to draft for need. They're going, people have concerns about Noel's health. Well, guess what? We might think about Greg Oden, but, compare two number one picks, Greg Oden, Blake Griffin. Both of these players out there essentially their entire first season. I think Oden played a couple games really well, but, went down with injury. Both of them are shut down for the entire first season. They both try and come back. Blake Griffin turns into a star. Greg Oden just has persistent injury concerns. Basic point, though, if you take a risk on a player that other people are scared of because of injury and it works out, see Steph Curry, Blake Griffin, it can work out really well in the long run, as long as you're willing to give up if the player, turns out terrible. Portland Trailblazers kept re-upping Oden, and, never went anywhere. So that kind of thing. Go for the best player in the draft, even if there are various concerns. trade, get rid of veterans that are going to be overpriced on the open market. Don't worry about signing free agents to the bottom of the roster spot. They're not going to play anyway. Don't worry about getting a coach. Who cares, right? You've got other things to worry about. So they are tanking the correct way. And if they keep doing what they're doing and, just one or two of their draft picks hits in the next few years, and they maybe get one good free agent signing, they're going to be a powerhouse in a few years. And that's troubling because there was another post Patrick wrote about, which was the Washington Wizards. And so I love this post. I should try and get it up in front of me. But basically, Patrick called it, you got to be bad to be good. And so here's the point. Someone's talking about the Wizards. And basically, the Wizards have been terrible, like, except for, the 70s when they were in the finals a couple of years. So they've been terrible. They keep losing. They keep getting draft picks. And the end conclusion this person has is they need to tank better. And you go, you've been tanking for 30 years. And the problem if you look at the Wizards with their tanking strategy is they'll get a high, they'll get a player like, Anton Jameson or Caron Butler, though those were traded for, or John Wall. John Wall's more appropriate. And they'll pay them money. They won't let them walk. They basically will tank, get a high draft pick, won't give up on the high draft pick. 76ers, other way around. Tank, get a high draft pick doesn't pan out, they let him go. And so his point was, wait, why do teams have to keep tanking like this? So juxtaposing that next to the 76ers, the problem with the 76ers is this may be the first team that is tanking correctly. And that's kind of troubling when you think about it for the NBA because the NBA already has a tanking problem. It's foolish. Teams tank the wrong way. We look at them and go, why are you intentionally losing games? Why are you blowing up your roster? Why are the Minnesota Timberwolves in a hurry to get rid of Kevin Love? I tweeted on this. My basic point is if you have a star on your team and they're not going to come back, a la LeBron James, Kevin Love, your goal is not to get rid of that player and get assets. Your goal is to try and scrap together a team as fast as possible to win now. My opinion is the Timberwolves should be trading for assets to try and win a title this season. And my kind of personal opinion on that is if you're not going to do that, what's the point? Why are you going to tell your fans we're going to keep rebuilding to hope to get to a season like we're at right now? That's preposterous to me. And I think people overestimate how long teams stay together. Post we quote a lot is Will Koo's post on age. And basically the average NBA career is about 6 years. So if you look at it that way, you're not going to keep a dynasty together more than 6 years without a lot of work. See the Spurs. Look at the Heat. The Heat did not do the maintenance that the Spurs did to their championship team, and it degraded over time and just fell apart at the end. The Spurs put the work in to keep it going, but a lot of teams don't do that. So if you've got a star player on a team that could potentially win now, and don't forget the Wolves won over 40 games last year, or close to. I think they either won over 40 games or were supposed to win over 40 games if you look at their point differential. Why not try and get those extra 10 wins with a few veteran players and make a run at it instead of getting rid of Kevin Love so that in 4 years you might have a 50-win team? It's kind of my opinion on that. But bringing back to the point of the 76ers, if the 76ers tank effectively and in 2 seasons are a powerhouse, this is problematic because teams are still copying the Spurs, so to speak, because they're tanking for Tim Duncan. I've written about this a lot. Wasn't really tanking. Sorry. If the 76ers tank effectively, you've got to worry that teams are going to keep trying to tank. The right answer is, get rid of the draft. But if you want to keep the draft around and tell teams not to tank, it's going to be problematic if the 76ers do it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's always been my thing when a tanking argument comes up is I think tanking is very ill-defined. We have what the 76ers are doing, which we think might be good. There's, the kind Arturo talks about, which is sort of like lineup tanking. Maybe that pick that got Harrison Barnes for the Warriors, we can argue whether that was a good pick or not, but they got that pick by sort of holding guys out so they wouldn't give up a conditional draft pick, right? They weren't actually gutting the roster. So that might be an okay way to tank. But then all these other bad ways that include wasting money on bad veterans, not a good way to tank, right? So it's pretty ill-defined, I think, overall in the media what tanking is.
Well, I'd also be curious on the holding players back. If you're a fan of a team and that at the end of the year, if things aren't going well, they're just going to start losing games intentionally. I would love to see the economic impact on this, which
Absolutely.
is, what is the impact of being a losing team at the end of the season if you were a winning team earlier? Like how much leeway do fans give you? I was looking at some charts like the Detroit Pistons are a fantastic team to watch because there is a lag behind goodness and them and their attendance. Basically, they made the conference finals, I think, 6 seasons in a row, maybe seven. Obviously made it to two finals. So their attendance 100% for like 7 straight years. Then they trade Chauncey Billups and they get Allen Iverson and they get a little worse and the attendance stays up. But then after they get bad, the attendance starts falling off. So I'm curious what impact that has and if it's worth it. But yeah, there are forms of tanking I think are correct. I think a majority of teams don't do it. Like I said with the Warriors, their problem is even if that was wise tanking, which, I don't know, I'd have to look at the analysis. Their problem is they refuse to give up on their assets after they've drafted them. And that means they entirely wasted the benefit of that tank. Basically, they tanked for, a lottery ticket, literally a lottery ticket to hopefully get a good player. Neither of the players, Harrison Barnes and Klay Thompson, neither of those players turned out that great. But instead of giving up on those players, trading them away for, better players like Kevin Love, or just letting them go and, drafting someone new, they're holding on to them, giving them minutes in their rotation, which is taking away from better players, giving them shots, which are taking shots away from better players. And that's kind of the problem. They're tanking the wrong way. And so the 76ers may be one of the few teams that can tank the right way, but that's what we noticed. This is a copycat league, but the copycats are bad. You see a team with a Michael Jordan and you say, oh, we need a high scoring shooting guard, not realizing that, excluding Michael Jordan, Clyde Drexler, light, I'll call him like a Michael Jordan light, maybe like a diet light zero. Like, I don't add like three terms that mean not as good as to Kobe Bryant, comparing him to Michael Jordan. He's nowhere close, but he's still a very good shooting guard in his prime. They kind of realize that, but then that's where you get Allen Iversons. They copycat successful teams, but they don't realize what makes the successful team successful. So that's kind of my take there.
Copy Wade and Ginobili, not Michael Jordan. That's your advice.
Well, no, copy Michael Jordan, but that's the problem. Teams just don't
They're not
realize.
Successful at copying it.
People don't realize what made, that's the problem, is everybody's like, Michael Jordan scored 30 points a game. That's what made him great, right? You're like, well, yeah, but he was scoring close to 60% true shooting every game. He could pass the ball. Michael Jordan was a great passer. He rebounded and stole too. People don't seem to realize that he did all these other things. They're just like, Ben Gordon, right? Does he score a lot? Excellent. He's got to be awesome. All right. So last topic. Thanks for. I'm excited being the only one on the podcast this week. I've gotten to get some rants in. The last topic. I don't actually have a lot to say. Maybe is Becky Hammon, who is I think the first female assistant coach in the NBA. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay, and that's for the Spurs. Nothing surprising there. It's not surprising to see the Spurs at the forefront of this, and I actually have to write. Someone asked me to answer this on Quora. I don't know if I have the best insight to it, but one of my problems, and I want to actually stress, I have no problem with Becky Hammon. If the Spurs think they're a good coach, they're a good coach. Nothing there. Sports is very sexist. I wrote an article about this about a year and a half ago at Wages of Wins about sexism in sports writing, and it's troubling when you kind of watch sports and you know what to look out for. The only real place women are kind of inserted into the game organically are cheerleaders. And I said one of my kind of weird watch the game moments, I was sitting not quite courtside, but close to courtside at a Nuggets game, and I was watching the cheerleaders during one of the breaks, and the cameramen were out, and one of the cameramen basically had an angle that was essentially just an upskirt angle. And I said, so someone's job is to just take upskirt shots of cheerleaders to maybe put on TV. And that was, kind of a very troubling notion for me when you talk about how women are portrayed in sports. You see these athletic males that are portrayed as heroes, and then, basically the women's only job is to come in and cheer in scantily clad clothing. So that's troubling. And you see all sorts of this. I used to listen to a lot more sports radio than I do now. Definitely read a lot of blogs. It's still common to, insult players by calling them girly. So I think Becky Hammon has a real uphill battle in the media. And one of the questions I have is the level of scrutiny she's going to get, especially since we tend to think that the impact of coaches is overblown. It's not to say coaches don't matter. I'm saying when you look at the media, your great example in the pre-show was Mark Jackson. how much did Mark Jackson matter to the Warriors last season? I don't doubt that he got in fights with the players. I don't doubt that there might have been locker room arguments. My question is, how many wins did that win or cost the team? And I don't think it's as much as we think. The one way coaches can really impact the team is not playing players. And so we could look at that. And I don't think Mark Jackson did a bad job selecting who to play based on what he had. So it's hard for me to know if Mark Jackson was a good or bad coach based on that definition. And someone you brought up was Violet Palmer. And, you said, your comment, I think, was, well, we know she's a bad ref, but, how bad, or is she as bad as other male refs? And I kind of said, I don't know if she's a bad ref, to be honest. I'd be curious on ref analytics.
No, I'm glad you corrected me there, because we really don't know, right? I'm not sure if the ref stats are put out to the public. Maybe they are. I don't know what they are. But the point is, overall, I would say that she gets the most criticism by far of any ref. And that's probably irregardless of how good or bad she is.
Yes. I use the irregardless. You're going to make grammar fans go insane. Get over it, by the way.
Irregardless of what grammar fans think, I'm going to keep using that word.
But I've kind of gotten over a lot of stupid language rules in English, because it's English is really a dumb language. It's so silly. Anyway, we'll save the English language rant for another day. But, I just know Becky Hammon is probably going to get a lot of scrutiny in the media, and I'm going to be really curious to see this. And I do happen to know that, it's rough to put up with a lot of scrutiny. I'm surprised how well professional athletes take it, to be honest. We see professional athletes acting out, and my general take is, with that amount of pressure and focus on you, I'm surprised how well they take it. So I'm not expecting great things from the sports media. The same sports media that can't handle an openly gay player being drafted and kissing his boyfriend in the NFL draft. I don't know. I'm slightly pessimistic. I'm excited to see it. I wrote an article on tokenism. Malcolm Gladwell talked about this, where basically there were female artists that kind of got accepted back in the day into some of the famous European art academies, so to speak. And you were like, this is going to be the brand new opening, right? And it was really tokenism. What happened is they let one female in to say, see, we're not sexist. And then they held it to a higher scrutiny than, per contemporaries, to say, see, women just aren't as good. I don't agree with that point. I'm saying this is what they did. And then they used that as kind of a barrier to keep more women from coming in. So my hope is that this is the beginning of, less sexism in coaching and front office positions in the NBA. There is no reason, there's nothing you can convince me about to say that is uniquely male about being an NBA coach or, being in an NBA front office. At the same time, the precedent I've seen in other things, in sports writing, like I said, Malcolm Gladwell's token piece makes me a little skeptical, to be honest, that this is going to lead to good things. And that's depressing to me. Sorry to end that on a downer. It's like, this is really good news, but I'm afraid the reception based on just historical precedent will not be good.
No, I'm with you on that. Good luck to her, though, for sure.
Yeah. And by the way, just another tip of the hat to the Spurs. I mean, it depresses me as well that when we look at the NBA, the only organization that I can really point at and say that is a well-run organization is the Spurs. And even when I disagree, like, there are times I disagree with them, like when they re-signed Manu Ginobili. I said, you overpaid him. And then, of course, he was amazing last season and amazing in the playoffs. And I was like, well, dang it. They signed Richard Jefferson, and I was like, that's a bad signing. And I talked to some people about why they might have done it. But guess what? After a season when they're like, yeah, this isn't working, they convinced him to take a cheaper contract and then shipped him off. So this is a team that realizes their mistakes quickly, does what we're saying about the draft, shotguns the draft, goes for the best players, doesn't care if they're going to stay overseas in Europe for a year, doesn't care, if they're, for whatever reason, their draft stock plummets. Kawhi for years and years and years. Indiana, just think about that. You could have Kawhi. You could have been a 60-plus win team last season, and even with Paul George down, going, yeah, we still have Kawhi to help us out. Nope. So anyway, good job to the Spurs. That's what I'll give them. Best of luck.
I'll make how about this? I'll make a devil's advocate argument to you about sexism in the NBA.
Ooh, I'm looking forward to this.
Okay, good. So is there possible that it's not sexism and it's just cronyism? It's just old white guys. That's who they know. Those are who they came up with, their contemporaries. So they're just going to stick with what they know. To go to the tech world where we always tend to go on this show that we're familiar with, one of the sayings is no one ever got fired for buying Cisco. And what that means is, Cisco's
Ah, you're younger, man. I'm used to hearing nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. But anyway,
Uh, interestingly enough, well, anyway, let's go back to the analogy, but it's got too far off. But sure, no one gets fired for buying IBM either. So what's the point of all that? These are incumbent, huge companies. They're a known factor, and you've known them for a long time, and everyone that you know also knows them. So it makes sense. Even if there's a new company that's coming up, maybe they have a better, cheaper product that fits your solution better, but you just got to go with what you know.
I'll just my answer to that is I actually agree. And rather than even like say it's a devil's advocate, it's both. Like that's the point.
Yeah, actually,
It's
that's a better way to put it.
it's an old boys club in the NBA, and there are definitely sexist and homophobic undertones to that. They were overt in the past too. There's nothing new
In
about
fact,
it.
how
So
about this? I'll tie in Popovich. I'll give him farther. The fact that he's so confident in his power there and his place in the league and with the Spurs, he can just do what he wants and not worry about the repercussion of going against the old boys network. Sitting out his players and, against the Heat on that nationally televised game is another great example of that.
yeah, I mean, I there's yeah, this is it. I'm okay getting a little off topic. I think how are we doing on time?
We're at 46 minutes, so maybe we should wrap it up. But
Okay,
I'm
so I
good
do
for all
want to.
night. Talk as long as you want, Dre.
Okay, well, I'll keep us under an hour. But anyway, there's a great TED talk, and I forget the guy's name. I think it's Pinker. But he talks about what makes a good employee and a good work environment. And he basically brings up four things. He says, first, you just have to have enough money to live off on. Money's got to be off the table as a concern. But then you need autonomy, mastery, and purpose are the three criteria he gives for being a good work environment. So autonomy, you're allowed to work on your own things. You don't have someone micromanaging you. Mastery, you're allowed to improve yourself, get better. You can't just be stuck doing the same thing. And then purpose, you have to believe that the company you're at, the place you're at, has a direction and a vision that you're behind. And, that's very subjective, to be honest. There are people that can work at great companies and just not get the purpose, right? There's a common term is cult of personality. So the people on your team, if we're talking basketball, just have to be behind your team message. So, that's one of the things the Spurs tend to do, right? Is they hire people that are behind their message. The autonomy and mastery, like I said, they convince the players they're going to improve them. And the autonomy, at least for Greg Popovich, so many coaches in this league are handcuffed. And there was that great Kevin Draper piece. I'll actually try and make sure to link it this time. I realized I forgot to link it last week in the comments. But he basically talks about how hard it is to analyze GMs because of how handcuffed they are by their owners. And it's the same thing with coaches. We don't know if a coach is told, look, you better be playing Klay Thompson at least 24 minutes a game by the owners or GM. So, but that's the advantage Popovich has. He's been given full reign. A lot of his players are given, at least they know what they're supposed to do and how to do it better, and they're on board with it. So I'm impressed the Spurs organization does that, and it's depressing more teams do not. That's kind of my personal opinion.
I got nothing on that one.
Perfect. All right. So I don't know if you have any shout outs because I didn't see you list any on the script, but I definitely have shout outs this week. And I left the link so hopefully you can put them up in front. I know I'm making you work double time, right? Because you're both talking and trying to keep the show running. So sorry about that, but appreciate it this week. But the first one was to Aaron Montgomery. I haven't seen it yet, but there's a new movie called Lucy that came out that has the stupid trope of only using 10% of your brain. Yeah, that's silly. And so I made a joke about it, which I thought was clever. But then Aaron Montgomery is so beautiful. He said that trailer is basically like the Earth's surface is only 10% water. But what if it was 100%? So brilliant, perfect metaphor for the stupid 10% comment. Aaron Montgomery, I've been following him for a while, smart guy, but that tweet just definitely deserves a shout out this week. The other shout out, this is actually going to get anecdotal and off basketball completely, is Tay Diggs is now following me on Twitter. And that made my day for a variety of reasons. I actually am a huge fan of Tay Diggs. You see the posters I have behind me. Back in college, I actually had an Equilibrium poster. So Tay Diggs, been a huge fan of his work. Made my day to see him follow me. I don't know why he's following me on Twitter, but thank you. The other funny thing is one of my dogs, the dog you heard rattling his collar at the start of the show, is named Diggs. When I call my dog, I often say, "Hey Diggs," and in my head I think Tay Diggs. So even more abstract and out there, but Tay Diggs, you made my day following me on Twitter. Thank you for that. So those are my shout outs. You got anybody, Brian?
No, I got no shout outs. I had fun this week. Great show. Great job, Dre.
All right, so I'll try and think of some good outro music. If you have any suggestions out there in the Twitterverse for good outro music on songs, I try and make it unique each week. So I might start. I did it this week. I shot out the topics onto Twitter, and I might start doing that more to see what you think of outro music. So anyway, I'm happy the off season has stayed exciting, and we will see you next week.